Welcome to today's episode of Online for Authors. With me today is DJ Quinn, better known as Dennis, who wrote the book Stick Figures. Welcome, Dennis.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
And you're from the other side of the country here, right? You're out in Washington State?
Correct.
Yeah. And I'm down here in Myrtle Beach, quite a ways apart. But I think your picture behind you is looks like nicer weather than we're having here today in Myrtle Beach. It's pouring.
Well, that's why you take those pictures in the summertime, because it's raining here today.
Right. Smart move. I found your book Stick Figures to be very interesting because for several years I used to produce public service announcements for Big Brothers Big Sisters out of New Hampshire. And so I was pretty familiar with the kinds of hurdles, the matches you needed to navigate. But you had an additional challenge with Mike. You were matched with him when he was only 7. When you met his foster mother, Betty, what was that meeting like for you?
When we met it was her and I and the caseworker were the ones prior to then meeting Michael, but they had given me a pretty good information on his background, and so I knew what his status was. But when I met her, I was very surprised. She was just very casually dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, and her long gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. And that was probably how I saw her almost every time I saw her over the next several years. She was very, very laid back and very gentle spirit, you could tell. And it was a surprise. And she was adopting this child at age 63. And it was a surprise why, but she had been his foster mother.
Yeah.
She had been his foster mother since the time he was 2. She had him in and out of the house. They would put him back in with his biological mother, who couldn't handle him or was mentally unstable. And there were times one time in particular where she was awarded the child back, and Mike went back home, and a couple hours later she called the police and said to come and get him because she didn't want to have him around anymore. So he went through a lot, and Betty was always the fallback person that the foster people would give to her. They would call her whenever, Mike was in trouble with his mother was no longer able to take care of him, and so she was just a very down to earth person who had adult children that were my age or a little bit older, and she was just as loving as can be and very determined. And she stepped forward because she was sure that this kid was going to get lost in the system at the way things had been going.
She did an amazing job too. And one of his issues early on was with speech. I read that one chapter where you talked about how he struggled so much with speech, and then you explained to him that you had similar issues. Tell us how that went.
His speech was, I think, it's dyspraxia or something. There was a short circuit between the brain and the tongue at some, so he had troubles getting words out, and he was very hard to understand when I first met him, and you had to listen real carefully. And he was in speech therapy, and he continued to do that. And it was about 3 or 4 years later when we were out one time that he really broke down. We were driving along, and he really broke down because his speech was really giving him trouble that day. And I always had him, when we go someplace, order his own meals or his own drink that he wanted. And you would see the look in the people that were taking the order they were just kind of like shocked because they couldn't understand what he was saying and I would encourage him to do that, and I would help him out a little bit when we needed to. But on that particular day that's covered in the book, is he was just having a horrid time, and all of a sudden he was trying to tell me something and he couldn't get it out, and he just started crying, and it was a real meltdown, and I could tell it was very emotional. It was a pretty deep little episode he was having. So I pulled the car over and just let him cry for a few minutes and that. And then I told him, I said, hey, Mike, I had speech therapy when I was a kid. And he looked at me like, you have, as if he didn't believe it. And I told him that, yeah, I was in about first or second grade. And I said, my S is wrong. And so I started telling him about it. And I said, I was so embarrassed about it that I didn't even tell my brothers and sisters that I was going to speech therapy. I didn't want them to know. And he was just looking at me and he almost didn't believe it. So I showed him how I used to talk, where all the S's would come out the side of my mouth and chicken and S's and were really hard to say. And he thought it was real funny. And then I got almost over exaggerated on saying S's and C's and that to him. And he just started laughing. But the important thing that came out of that, surprisingly, was I never saw him have a breakdown over his speech from that period on. I tried to reassure him that just keep working on the speech. It will get better. Nobody may be able to fix it for you, but it will get better. And it did for him. It got very good for him. And
I know the title Stick Figures. I understand why, but how did it become a habit for you guys to do that in every time you ended your day together?
When I first met him, they had told me he had a trouble with transition, so that when you're in a match, don't be playing and say, let's go. It had to be give him some time. In 5 minutes, we're going to go, and then in 3 minutes, we're going to go. Okay. And we're going to wrap it up in a minute and do that. And so what I did, knowing that we'd schedule our match outings would probably be a little bit irregular because I had an irregular work schedule. I made him a little calendar and had marked on it when his birthday was and when we met and when Christmas was, that sort of thing. And gave it to him the very first day we met. And what we ended up doing, every time we come home from a match, we'd go to his house and we'd sit down, and his mom would always be there, and we would sit down, Betty, and we'd always sit down and talk with her. And she'd have her lemonade and usually he was smoking a cigarette. And then at some point she would say, okay, Mike, go get your calendar. And he would go to the drawer where it was and bring it back. And we'd mark the next event. But for some reason, one day we had either bicycled or something. And I drew in the box of that day, these two little stick figures, one littler than the other. And they were on bicycles. And that was what we did that day. And then we did it again the next time, because every week he would get the calendar so we could reschedule for the next week. And pretty soon we had a calendar full of little stick figures showing what we had done that day. And that they were not artistic gems, that's for sure, because I can't draw worth beans. But he would then sometimes, after we would do that, he would take the calendar and he'd sit there for a few minutes and look back at what we had done in the previous months. And
almost like his own book. Yeah.
Right. And it was, if we'd gone to a football game, there'd be the two of us there, and it might have the score of the football game. Or if we'd gone swimming, the two guys would be in the water swimming. And
right. Swimming was one of the things he really liked to do.
Right. Yeah.
He was fortunate that you had a boat, and that you and your partner with his little brother could go out and spend some time. I think he spent a lot of time in the water, didn't he?
Oh, he did. He would go swim. Even if we didn't go out on the boat, he'd like to go swimming, and we'd go to Lake Washington and swim down there, or we'd go canoeing and down there. And he would also want to be swimming. He just loved the tactile feel of the water around him. It was just real comforting for him. And we nicknamed him the fish. We always called him the fish because he would be the last one out of the water whenever we would go together. My partner had a little brother that was same age, 7 years old when they met. And they loved going out in the water. It was a pretty good gig for them. You could take them out all day, wear them out, and take them home, and the mothers would love it.
That would certainly wear them out. Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Your relationship with him covered a span of like 13 years, I believe.
Correct.
When did the problems with him begin? When did he go from that little boy who was swimming and all of that, and and start to have issues that
It was
you had to really deal with?
It was probably around maybe 14 years old when he was 14 or 13, 14.
So halfway
it was right
into
around right around puberty, where he would just have some kind of weird behaviors, weird thoughts, or just harder to communicate with. And then that apparently I didn't realize it at home. He was getting really more abrasive with Betty, and she had her daughter was living with her at that time, and the daughter husband, and they had a grandchild, and he would come over occasionally, an infant. And one day Mike threatened Betty and said he could also hurt that little kid too. And at that point, that was it, that she had him removed. It was just not safe for him to be there.
Right.
And from that point on, it was the whole struggle of finding places to live, staying there, trying to get treatment, all of that. So it was about 5 or 6 years in the time we had been together.
How did he end up in jail?
One time he didn't really end up in jail often. At one time he ran away from the group home he was at and was gone for a week, and no trace of him. And then for some reason he called Betty one night and told her he was out on the street and he was having fun and he was probably going to stay out longer for a week or whatever. And for some reason at that point, at that time, I put it together that this festival bumper shoot in Seattle was going on, and we went up there and looked, and sure enough, it was in the Seattle Center where he and I used to go in there. He was at the video games, and he had cut his hair and was almost unrecognizable, but he had been having a good time. He stunk. He hadn't bathed anything.
Right.
So we took him back to the group home, and then the police came to get him because they didn't know what to do with him that night. So they apparently then found some other place, and then you would have to track him down because they could never release the information where he was. But so that's about when that happened, and then it continued to progress and went through the whole phases of group homes and hospitalization and medications and some improvement.
Yeah, he had it all. I know earlier on he used to like to talk about, I think, was it showgirls? Is that what he called them? Showgirls, I think.
Showgirls. That turned about one day when he and Joe, my partner, and Nate and Mike and I, we were going to go to the boat show, and Mike and I convinced Joe and Nate that it would be a good idea to take the bus down there, the city bus, which Joe and Nate never did. And so we did. And coming back from there, we were probably the first ones on the bus, and we went by, it was a strip club, and it had this sign up there that said Showgirls, and it was flashing. And Mike saw the sign, and he said, "Let's go see the Showgirls." And the whole back and forth on the bus got louder and louder as the bus got more filled up with people. And finally Nate had it, because Nate knew Mike, how confused he was. And Nate yelled from across the way, and Mike, they danced naked. And whoa, Mike was like, he couldn't believe it. And it just got to be a big joke from that point on, that, hey, let's go see the Showgirls whenever in fact, Joe and Nate still get together. Nate comes down and visits us, and he's 40 years old now, and we still will joke sometimes. What are we going to do? Well, let's go see the Showgirls.
That's amazing. So then there was a time when you wondered if you were wasting your life showing up for him. What was that like? When did that come about? How did that feel?
When he first didn't live at home, he was in group homes, and they tried several of them. And that was that was important, I think, to maintain that contact with him, because of, he didn't have anybody in his biological life that was connected to him. And so that was that I did. And then when he was hospitalized, which was for probably a year and a half at one place, and then and almost a year at a second place, he was so heavily medicated, and there was so limited things you could talk about that to see him, you would be, am I wasting my time coming here?
Right.
He just was, the medications would really ramp down the emotions, and it would be really hard to talk with him. And that point, it was like, okay, really, what am I doing? And I made the decision that I really wanted him to have that connection with the past, at least have somebody come and see him once in a while and talk to him and hang and spend some time. And he seemed to appreciate it. And, but it was really hard. It was hard to
imagine.
Talk about.
And yet you still, at that point, with all that going on, you still didn't say, oh, I want to just, turn this in and look for another little brother that I can,
No.
You committed yourself to that.
He was a special little guy. He was really fun as a kid, and he had gone through a lot. And when he reached that point, you kind of knew it was never going to get better, but you didn't know what it was going to be for him.
Right.
And I felt it was the right thing to do and the right thing for him. And also for me to go up and see him and spend some time with him, a couple of hours. I'd see him every other week. And just let him know, hey, there's people still
people still
care about you. Yeah, there's somebody that still cares about you. And Betty and her family would have done that too, although he was in the South End, and then Betty's health was failing too.
Right.
But she was, but when he'd call, he would call me occasionally, and then that disappeared. And it was just.
And then there was the horrible police report.
Right at the end
when
of it,
he actually left this world. What was it like reading that report? Must have been horrible.
It was a lot. I had gone up to Seattle and got his ashes, a portion of his ashes that the family had given me, and brought that back. And there was the police report in there. And just reading it, it was pretty intense. About somebody had seen him coming off the bridge, coming down, and where he landed, it was right in an area where we used to go all the time. And just to read about the injuries, I kind of skimmed over that. But then when I turned to the last page of it, there was a stick figure drawn on the street, and that was him.
Oh.
And that really hit. Yeah. And it tied together, from those times we sat down on the couch and did stick figures of bicycling and swimming, and that to here it is. This is where your story finally ends. And so part of the rewriting of the book was to kind of lift that stick figure off the page and let people know a little bit about this kid, because he was sweet. He was naive. He was very friendly. He loved life when I first met him, and he was always glad to get around, hang around together. And I growing up in a large family it was so different from my background.
Right.
And
and he was certainly not the typical little brother that gets matched.
No.
Some of the similarities are there, but he was unique in many ways.
Right.
And also you remained close with Betty for many years. In fact, until she died. And didn't I read that you went to her funeral and actually poured Mike's ashes in the water with her ashes, with her children?
Right. Her children had invited up there the night, a guy had called us and said, you probably want to come tonight. And they had her home at hospice. And we were there when she died, actually, and with them. And it was peaceful, and it was sad. And it also, there's also explains in the book that why we were standing around crying, and her body is on the bed over there. Her great grandson, the 6-year-old, came over and climbed up on the bed next to her and then started jumping up and down and assured everybody that yes, she was in fact dead. She's not moving. A little humor in the middle of all that tragedy. But she was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman. And
yeah, those little kids will do certain things like that. I remember I had a little cousin, and when one of my aunts passed away, he was quite the little Dennis the Menace type. And he actually went and tried to get into the coffin because he didn't believe she was dead. He thought she was just sleeping. So you have some of that too. They can be crazy at times. For people who might be interested in working with a little brother, tell us what the process is like to get matched with someone.
They have Big Brothers and Big Sisters is a national organization. I'm not affiliated with them other than as a volunteer, having been matched with a couple of kids. But they are located in almost every major community, right. Some smaller communities. And what they're looking for is to match both men with boys and women with girls that might need some help, or a friend, a mentor friend, a good role model, whatever it be in their life. And the process is you do an application, and they have different programs. And I know out here they had a school-based one where they do a background check, and then we met with them at the schools, the kids, or some of them are like more class related stuff. Then the one-on-one out in the community thing usually is a more intense screening. The one when I met Mike, it was about 6 hours worth of interviews with a caseworker going over almost every aspect of your life. But once you're cleared to do that, then they try to match you with somebody who they feel the kids have done and parents have done a pre-match, what they're looking for in a big brother, and they try to match you with someone that might be in your area and someone that your needs might fit, or their needs might fit with you. And right now I'm in the process of applying again. They have called me and gave me a profile of somebody. And now with the step they're in next is they meet with the caseworker and the family and the kid, meet and hear about me and whether they want to move forward with that match. But that's sort of the process. They ask for a year commitment, probably about 4 hours a month in a year. Per month.
Right. They don't ask you for, they do it. It's just about a year, but many of them last for many years.
Sure.
I mean, it goes on.
Joe, my partner, Joe, he met Nate when he was 7 and Nate's now 40. And Nate's, the process of that, Nate had filled out an application, and on the application it said, "What kind of big brother do you want?" And Nate was a 7-year-old. He goes, "A 10-year-old." And I always joke, we joke with Joe that you're the closest adult they could find to a 10-year-old for Nate, and it worked out great. So, he's married.
So you actually answered my last question, was going to be, so are you working on another little brother? Or have you had your fill of it? And
I decided this time that I would do it again. I had done a lunch buddies deal, which was for the last school year. You'd go and have lunch. Men and women would go and have lunch with these kids. You were matched with a particular kid, and you'd have lunch with them at 20 minutes, first graders, and then go out and play at recess. That was for me. It was really difficult because the kid I had was very distracted, very hyperactive, very not a lot of boundaries. And it was hard to, in that short period of time and that make any real connection with them. But they discontinued that program and asked if you wanted to continue on with something along that line, or if you want it to be a community based, which is in the community. And I said I would do that. So I think I have it in me to hang with time. They always have a huge waiting list of kids looking for for
Oh, yes, they do.
volunteers.
It's amazing to know how many, and some of them actually have both parents. Maybe one might be incarcerated, maybe one might be hospitalized for one reason or another, but you don't think, well, these are orphans. They're not all orphans.
Yeah.
It's a wide variety of young children who need a friend
Right.
who can help in that way. So why did you decide to write this book?
I actually thought the very first night I met him, I thought that, maybe someday I'll write a book about this, because he's such a unique child and had been in some really unique circumstances. You've got a woman that's 3 years old that's adopting a 7-year-old here. And I just thought I would do that. And when the whole thing, there was such a contrast between when we first met and the fun you'd go out and have and everything, and just that, and then to the part when he developed the mental illness and whatnot. And that for me was real eye-opener on what the difficulties for people to find help for these people who are suffering from mental illness or housing, that it was pretty, a big difference. And then also when it came down to what Mike and our relationship towards the end was, we were playing chess. I'd go over and we played chess for a couple hours in locked rooms at the institution. And, that was just like unbelievable live theater, looking around and listening and seeing how he was. And then you're leaving and you walk out that door and my dogs have more freedom than all the people that live in there. And
amazing. Yeah.
It's just, and for me, it was a real challenge in acceptance and a real challenge in why does this happen? And why does a kid like this have that challenge?
Yeah. It's amazing. I really appreciate reading this book. It was very insightful. And I think for people who are watching and listening, want to know more about this book, you can go over to Facebook and log on to Novels and Latte, and you might even be able to win a copy of this book. But if people had more questions for you, do you have a website or someplace that they could contact you?
I do. It's djquinnauthor.com.
Very simple.
djquinnauthor.com. And it's on, I have the books available for sale there, and they can contact me and read some of the blogs of some of the other stories that I've had.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dennis, for being with us today. And I just want to remind everyone, tune in again for our next episode of Online for Authors. And until then, this is Carole O'Neill. Thanks again, Dennis.
Thank you, Carole. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.